Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Bible Backdrop. Thank you for joining me as we look into the culture and history surrounding the Bible. Today's topic, we're going to talk about the Samaritans. We know the story of the Good Samaritan and about the woman at the well, but where did they come from? Who were they? What did they believe? And what was their relationship to the Jewish nation? Samaria was actually a city in the northern kingdom of Israel. 1 Kings 12:16 through 24 talks about how the nation was split, with the tribes of Judah and Benjamin making up the southern kingdom, from now on called the nation of Judah, and the other 10 tribes making up the northern kingdom, from now on called Israel. 1 Kings 16:24 tells the story about the founding of Samaria. Quote, "He, Omri, king of Israel, bought the hill Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver. And he built on the hill and named the city which he built Samaria, after the name of Shemer, the owner of the hill." End quote. Remember from the Bible Math episode, 2 talents of silver was between 150 to 160 pounds. Samaria became the capital of the northern kingdom and was the location of the palace and burial ground of its kings. The city was on the eastern edge of a hill, surrounded by 3 taller mountains. While there was higher ground above it, the mountains were too far for long-range weapons to hit the battlements. The steep sides of the hill made it difficult for advancing infantry to rush the walls. It was a strategic nightmare for attacking armies who, when they did attack, relied on besieging and famine to do their work for them. Since the city was the capital of the northern kingdom, the area around it, and eventually the whole country, became synonymous with Samaria. Throughout the Old Testament, we see many prophecies that refer to Samaria as being the northern kingdom. When you read the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, you notice that the kings of Samaria were all pretty bad. None of them followed the God of Israel and had all their people follow after idols. Even after repeated warnings from prophets, they still did not turn. God finally drops the hammer on them using the Assyrian Empire. Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, discovers that Hoshea, the king of Israel, is in league with Egypt and goes up to fight against the nation. He besieges Samaria for 3 years before it capitulates. He then takes many of the inhabitants away as captives and settles them in modern-day Iraq and Iran. Now comes the beginning of the story of the Samaritans we see in the New Testament. 2 Kings 17:24 through 41 tells how the king of Assyria then took people from Babylon and other areas and settled them in Samaria. The book goes on to say that they did not fear the Lord, so he sent lions that killed many of them. They contacted the king and told him that they did not know the gods of this land or the customs. So the king sent a priest from the exiled inhabitants back to Samaria to tell them about how they should fear the Lord. Instead of turning to him only, they served their gods while also showing a fear of the Lord and building high places to him. While these Gentiles had been moved to the area to populate for the king of Assyria, there were still some Israelis that lived there. The prevailing thought is that, against God's commands, they intermarried with the Gentiles, and this also led to a further blending of Judaism with these other religions. The strife between Jews and Samaritans appears to start in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra. A delegation goes to Ezra and asks if they can help with the rebuilding of the temple, as they claim to also follow the Lord. Whether due to old north-south rivalries or because they followed other gods besides Yahweh, the offer was bluntly refused. This turned the Samaritans against the Jews as they started mocking them for rebuilding Jerusalem and the temple. They also sent a letter to the king of Persia, who had taken over the Babylonian Empire that had taken over the Assyrian Empire, stating that the Jews intended to revolt once Jerusalem was built. This didn't exactly improve relations between the groups. Once the temple was built and Jerusalem established, some did not like the strict administration of the law. Some of these people found their way to Samaria, where they built a temple on Mount Gerizim. Here, they established a form of Judaism centered around the Pentateuch. Remember from episode 1 that the Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible, also called the Torah. This continued until sometime around 112 or 111 BC, when a Hasmonean leader named John Hyrcanus destroyed the temple, further dividing the Jews and the Samaritans. When Jesus starts his ministry, the Samaritans have an established land and religion. From a geographical point of view, imagine the current nation of Israel divided into 3 parts. In the north was Galilee, where Jesus did most of his ministry. In the center was Samaria. In the south was Judea, which was the location of Jerusalem. The eastern border of all these areas was the Jordan River. Jews who traveled from Galilee to Judea would first cross the Jordan River into Perea, then travel south, and cross the Jordan again into Judea. This way, they would bypass Samaria. This wasn't just because of some superiority complex. There was real concern among Jews about their safety when traveling through Samaria. The Samaritan religion was very similar to Judaism, but with a few differences. Much like the Sadducees, they only believed in the Torah. However, unlike the Sadducees, they believed their Torah was the true Torah, unlike what was taught by the Jewish scholars. One website I found showed that there were 6,000 differences between the Samaritan and Jewish Torah. About half were spelling differences, and the other half were changes or additions to some of the stories. They also believed that Mount Gerizim, not Zion, where Jerusalem is located, is the place of true worship. They believed that it's here that Noah first found land, and that Abraham was sent to sacrifice his son Isaac. Now that we've established who the Samaritans are and what they believed, let's look at the two stories in the Gospels where Samaritans are front and center. The first is the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells this parable in Luke 10 to a lawyer who had asked how to inherit eternal life. Jesus answered, "Love God and love your neighbor." In an attempt to justify himself, he asked, "Who is my neighbor?" It's at this point Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan that goes something like this. A man is traveling to Jericho from Jerusalem. It doesn't mention it in the Gospel, but this road had a lot of twists and turns where it was easy for bandits to hide. The man is beaten and left for dead by a group of bandits. A little while later, a priest comes down the road, but passes the man. Then a Levite shows up and does the same. Finally, a Samaritan passes by, but shows compassion on him. He pours oil on his wounds and takes him to an inn where he takes care of him. Then he pays the innkeeper to continue taking care of him after he's gone. The contrast was certainly not lost on Jesus' audience. The people who were most revered in Jewish society showed no compassion, while the hero of the story is someone they reviled. The second major story is the woman at the well. In John 4, Jesus is traveling with his disciples. They are traveling through Samaria instead of around it like is normally done by the rest of the Jewish population. His disciples have gone into the town of Sychar to buy food, but Jesus has a divine appointment. It's around noon, and a woman from the city comes to the well. This was an unusual time to get water because most of the women got their water earlier in the day. Jesus meets her and asks her for a drink. She's surprised because he is asking this of a Samaritan woman. She's further surprised when he begins to talk to her about who he is. Then he seals the deal when he tells her about who she is. At this point, she understands that he is at least a prophet, but he then reveals himself as the Messiah. Think about how amazing that is. One of Jesus' earliest proclamations as Messiah is to a Samaritan woman who hasn't exactly had the most stable home life. She is even looked down on in Samaritan culture, which explains why she was at the well at noon. Like I said earlier, people got their water early in the day. She wanted to avoid the stares and whispers, so she went in the middle of the day. Much like at Christmas with the shepherds, God chooses to reveal himself to those considered outcasts and on the lower rungs of society. So where are the Samaritans today? At the last census in Israel, there were about 200 people total in separate communities who considered themselves Samaritans. They were treated pretty harshly in the brutal Roman reprisal of the Jewish rebellion in 70 AD, and then again later under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, so that their numbers have drastically decreased. These communities still practice an ultra-Orthodox version of their religion and strictly follow the law of Moses. So to recap, Samaria started out as a city in the northern kingdom of Israel and became the capital of the country. As a result, the country took on the same name. After the Assyrian Empire conquered the nation, they brought outsiders into the area to populate it while many Jews were exiled. The new arrivals worshipped Yahweh along with other gods. When exiles from Judah began to return, Samaritans offered their help but were rebuffed, starting a break between Samaritans and Jews. Some Jews started going over to the Samaritans, and they built a temple on Mount Gerizim, which was subsequently destroyed. By Jesus' time, the Samaritans and Jews had been at odds for a few hundred years. Jesus flipped the script and preached the gospel to the Samaritans, established himself as the Messiah, and ministered to them. Personally, I think some of that was not only to minister to them, but to teach his followers that God shows no partiality. And that's it for another episode of Bible Backdrop. I hope you enjoyed it and now understand a little bit more about the Samaritans. If you're enjoying Bible Backdrop, please leave a 5-star rating and review. Word of mouth is still the best way for this podcast to grow, so tell a friend and have them subscribe. Bible Backdrop is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can email me at biblebackdrop@gmail.com. If you have some time, stay on after the music to hear some of my thoughts in an after show. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week. So welcome to the Bible Backdrop After Show. Thank you so much for sticking around and joining me. So I decided to do this little after show, and I'm not sure if I'm going to do this for every episode or not, but I wanted to go ahead and do this and kind of give you an unscripted version or an unscripted look at something, some of my thoughts that I have, either on the episode or things that are going on. Normally, I know these episodes are very scripted, so sometimes I might want to do something off the cuff to talk about the subject matter today. So the subject matter today, talking about the Samaritans. The funny thing about this is that this episode was one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast. The Samaritans, we didn't learn much about the Samaritans. We learned that they and the Jews didn't get along for whatever reason, but we didn't know why. We weren't told what the strife or the problems were between the two. So we kind of started digging into what their problems were and why they didn't like each other. I think it was really amazing how Jews felt, so strongly against Samaritans, and Jesus just walks in there, and like I said in the episode, he kind of flips the script. He, goes and ministers to them, and not just to the Samaritans, but to a Samaritan outcast, a woman who's an outcast, even in the Samaritan culture. And so I think it gives a really good, deep look at who Jesus was and how he operated, and how, as a result, we should operate. We should do the same. We should go to those who are, that most people would consider outcasts. I think it's a very good look at what we should do as followers of Christ. So that's my thought on the episode, a little unscripted there. And so I also wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about where the podcast is. So right now, this is the 15th episode. Been doing this now for a little over 6 months. And we are currently at 723 total downloads. The majority of those are in the U.S., but we do have 27 downloads that have been international. So I just wanted to tell everyone, thank you so much for downloading and listening. But there's some things I do want to ask from my audience, and some things I'd love for y'all to do. I would love to hear from y'all. I give the email in every episode, but I would really like to hear from some of y'all. Now, I know I have family and friends that listen, but I would like to hear from people who, I may not know. So if you would, please send me an email. It's biblebackdrop@gmail.com. I promise that I will not spam you or bother you or fill up your email inbox. I just want to know who my listeners are. I just want to know where everybody's from. I know I've got some people from Australia who have been downloading lately, and I'd love to hear from y'all. So if you would, please send me an email to biblebackdrop@gmail.com. And also, if you would, like I said, word of mouth is the best way to get this podcast out there. So please tell a friend, have them sign up, have them subscribe. If you have any questions or anything, or would like to hear about a different subject on an episode, would love to hear from you. And that's all I've got. So thank you so much for joining the Bible Backdrop After Show. Have a great day.